Robert and Shirleene, thank you for talking to me. I've just read your book, Gay and Lesbian Then and Now. Can you tell me the idea behind the book?
Well, I think what we wanted to do was to look at people's personal stories and the way that their lives had been impacted by a lot of the changes that gay and lesbian people have experienced, I guess, over the last 60 years.
I think that's a very good summary.
How did you both get involved?
Well, actually, it was Shirleene's idea to begin with. She put in a grant application to come to Macquarie University, and part of that grant application was the idea of doing a partnership with the National Library of Australia, and they were our partners in this project. So Shirleene and I put in, with some other academics, put in a big grant application to the Australian Research Council with the National Library as our partner to interview 60 gays and lesbians around the country. And then that was successful, and then out of that we chose 13 people to go into the book.
How did you find those 60 people?
Well, it was quite interesting. So what we did was we set up a website, and then we tried to promote the website, and we used a lot of LGBTIQ media. The ABC radio was particularly supportive, and they promoted it. So what we would do is we'd have people fill out applications, and then we would try and make sure that the people that we interviewed were as representative as possible. We wanted to have a really good spread of ages, so it was very important that we could talk about those changes over time. And we also wanted to have a good spread of both lesbians and gay men, and representative of things like diversity in terms of racial background and so on. So those were the main criteria, I think.
So did people come to you then, rather than you headhunt people in particular?
Yeah, we didn't really do much of the kind of the headhunting, the kind of plucking, which you do sometimes do with this kind of research. But this project, because we really wanted it to be as diverse as possible. With the kind of that, when you approach other people, that's when you have a very specific person in mind. Often you might go to them, but this way we kind of put a general call out through various avenues and picked people once they'd put in an online form. And then I think we got how many? 400, 300?
Yeah, I was definitely up in the high 300s, I think. So yeah. It was quite impressive, and I think that we both were really impressed with the bravery of people really being prepared to come forward and share their stories, and often, for some of them, they've been quite traumatic as well. So it takes a lot of strength to do that. So to have that many come forward was really quite impressive, I think.
When did you start writing the book?
We started writing actually not that long ago. It was about April last year, April 2015. So we got it done pretty quickly. It was all done. The full draft was done by December, and then so we wrote like fury.
And
when was the first interview?
I've got to cast my mind back. So it was probably, we started, I guess, in July. Was it July?
It was a bit later, I think. Spring 2013.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So yeah, and once we started doing the interviews, then it was a pretty full-on program of travel. Just because we were literally covering so much of Australia, we literally went everywhere from Western Australia to Darwin, down to Tasmania. There's very little of Australia that wasn't sort of reached by people involved in this project.
Did you learn anything from the project that you hadn't learned before or knew before?
Well, that's a good question. So I'll throw it to Shirleene.
I think I've always, we sort of, I guess something that we wanted to do was to focus in perhaps on people whose stories may not have been recorded otherwise. So it was a really interesting opportunity to see the way that maybe people who had not a long sort of involvement in maybe LGBTIQ activism had experienced social change, and that was something that hasn't really been mapped. So for us, I think that was an interesting opportunity. Even though there were a lot of, difficulties that people talked about, something that I found was that there's also a lot of resilience in the stories, and that was also, I think, quite inspiring to see the way that people really have dealt with great bravery through some very difficult circumstances.
I've thought of something now.
Brilliant.
That's why I just went to Shirleene something to think. I interviewed a lot of the younger people, so under 30 or under 35. And I guess whilst I had some awareness that there had been some shifts going on because I've done other work in this area, I guess I was a little surprised by how often, not always, but how often the younger people I spoke to had a very strong desire to live an ordinary life, to be seen as normal, ordinary at the same time as aware that there were moments in their life when they weren't treated as ordinary, and to them that was a great insult. So a much stronger desire to be average, ordinary, which coming from, I'm 50, so for my generation there was a really marked sense of difference, and even a strong celebration of that difference. So I was a little surprised by how strongly people wanted to be just like everyone else.
Because one of the recurring themes I saw in the book is difference and normality. And at times they're a contradiction. We have people in the book, there's a woman towards the end who just wants to get married and have children. And then there's another young person, I think his name was Matt,
Yes.
who supports the idea of things like marriage equality, but also mourns perhaps that loss of gay liberation and is concerned about what a lot of people refer to as assimilation. Did you find that throughout the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There definitely was that kind of tensional contradiction, and it does come through a little bit. And I think that to juxtapose those two people that you're sort of referring to, maybe perhaps touch on something that is happening in the broader LGBTIQ community, that there is, for a lot of people who have gone through a lot in their lives, the idea of being able to lead a life that isn't marked by discrimination is obviously something that's incredibly wonderful to them. But as you say, there's people who have enjoyed the rich culture that the gay and lesbian community has developed as a result, and as a form of resistance to a lot of the discrimination that they faced historically.
And as well as a book about social history, it really is a book about Australian history. We've got people who were using the beats, people I think such as Merv at the beginning. There was nowhere else really to go to meet people, and then we've got people who just go out to bars or can use Grindr, anything like that. So to what extent did you find it's a historical document?
We're both trained as historians, so I hope it's a kind of deeply historical document. That the idea is, and this is what as historians we like to look at, is change over time. So in a sense that we to some degree we chose lives when we were deciding what we were going to turn into a book. We chose lives that to a degree caught something about a particular moment, and like Merv does capture that working class Brisbane 1950s gay life. As to other people we chose, there was something in each of the chapters. There's kind of a little core. For example, Ivana is another really good one, a 92 woman who really came into her own during the 1990s as a lesbian from all the popular culture, but the increase in popular cultural references to lesbians. And so we chose people as embodiments or really good examples of particular historical moments.
But it really is a cross-section of society. Although essentially it is Australian social history, you've got somebody in it who's originally from Malaysia, you've got another person who migrated from England, and you've got somebody in it who had HIV but has now sadly died, who was an activist. You put an update at the end on what people's lives were like right now. Why did you feel that was important?
I think I think there's a line in the book where you talk about how an oral history interview, it's something that's conducted at a particular moment in time, and I think it was just a way of sort of showing how lives aren't static and people develop and change, and just to give the reader and I guess the person who was interviewed that sense of where they are now and how their lives might be at this particular time.
Yeah, so the danger is when you write a book like this is that the chapter, the life can seem set. And I guess we did that to say no life is set. In fact, after we'd written that update, just in the last month or so, I through corresponding with one of the people in the book, I found out that he'd since broken up with his partner. And it was funny because part of me was going, you can't break up, that ruins my chapter. But I was just reminded how, and this was not a couple I would have predicted who would break up. So it was a real salutary reminder to me of you just can't pick what a life is going to be like.
And life, I guess, is an ongoing narrative as well.
Yeah.
What were some of the biggest challenges in writing the book?
I think that we were working with a group of people, obviously we're both gay lesbian ourselves, but we're working with a group of people who probably for fairly good reasons, you know, to open up to us and to share their stories, that does take quite a degree of trust. And I guess to do this in a really respectful way and try and come up with an outcome that they were really happy with was very important to us, and that was something I think that was at the core of the project. So I mean, I guess I don't know if it was a challenge, but it was something that was a real priority that we worked very hard to try and do.
Yeah, it is a challenge writing about people, I think, to try and keep it respectful. Not that you set out to be disrespectful, but we wrote this chapter, we wrote the book and made a decision that we'd send each chapter to the person we'd written about. And every time you do that, you live in terror that it's going to come back and they're going to go, you've just got it completely wrong, or I think it's completely outrageous what you said. And so that was probably the challenge, is that we're writing about a life, and as historians, often you write about someone who's dead, which is quite easy because they don't talk back. These subjects talk back and made it a better book. But as I say, every time I send it off, I think, oh no, shit. What happens if I've got to just chuck this out?
What did you enjoy most about writing the book?
For me, I think it was actually meeting a whole range of people that I would never have met in other circumstances. And there was, I definitely feel really proud of, I think, what we achieved in that there's firstly the 60 stories that are now in the National Library collection, which I think will be built on and used by other researchers and will serve as a permanent record of, you know, gay and lesbian life and social change. But yes, certainly just getting out there and talking to a diverse range of people, and I think overall what they told us was that they found it to be a really empowering experience, and I think that was something that was a really real positive for me.
Would you agree?
Yeah, no, look, I would. I mean, we kind of set this in one of the first drafts of the introduction, but the publishers took it out. And I think I may have said this, but not wanting to sound like a Miss World or Miss Universe contestant, I just find people fascinating, really, absolutely fascinating. So you turn up and you talk to someone, and it's always very nerve-wracking when you do turn up, because you don't know who you're going to meet. And I get nervous before every interview. But once you get going, every life is fascinating, I think. And then you get the chance to pore over the transcript and try and not make sense of the life, because you're only actually just pulling out a couple of strands. But that's kind of exciting, trying to think, how can I sum up in some ways a particular life about this person? And it is exciting, actually. It's very gratifying when they come back and they say they liked it. That's lovely.
What has been the reaction so far from readers? Obviously, you've only just launched it, but those who've actually read it.
Well, as you say, because we just had the launch this week, so I think people are sort of in the middle of reading it now, but the reaction that we've had so far has been really positive, and I guess the nicest thing was to just extend on what Robert has said. The people who have read the whole sort of thing are the people who are in it, and the reaction from them has been really lovely, and I think for me that was a really important point. Slowly, as other people read it, the feedback that's coming in has been quite positive, so that's really nice too.
I was my boyfriend liked it, but he didn't have much choice.
Quite right.
And your wife liked it.
Oh yeah, no, she did. She's very touched by a lot of the stories, which is really interesting. And I think particularly for younger people in the gay and lesbian community, to read stories like people like Merv or Nola, that really does give that sense of just how much has changed, and in some ways it highlights things that perhaps people in our community haven't even really thought of.
That said, I did actually have someone who buttonholed me at the launch to tell me how much they didn't like the book. So that was an interesting experience, a 78er, and I think we're aware that this will happen.
What were the grounds?
That we left out the difficult stuff, that we left out the real struggles. And in a sense, this book is reasonably celebratory. It's kind of saying, look, there's been a huge amount of challenges, but there's been a quite deal of progress. So I think, a 78er who's lived through different particular struggles. And I guess also, for the most part, we tried to keep away from activist stories. There's a few kind of slip through the net, partly because those stories are so well rehearsed. So we wanted to go outside of those. So I also think that there may well be people who think they don't capture the real struggles, the political struggles, and the real deep oppression. And for those people, it probably will come across as a little too small or liberal, perhaps.
For me, though, that was what was refreshing. Often the narrative we hear is about first Mardi Gras, about legislation, but these were about people's lives all over Australia. Some had HIV, some had been married with children, married to people of the opposite sex. Some had been abused by their families. So there were a lot of troubles and tribulations in the book. It certainly wasn't an easy life for many.
Yeah, no, that's true. So I think it was the political struggles were in the book.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you can kind of, I think William makes a really good point though, that it's not a relentlessly happy book, and even now there's still, you can see sort of the bullying and young people talking about it. There's still difficulties in living a lesbian or a gay life, and yes, I mean the political material is not at the front of the book, but then I do think that there are some other great works that have really gone into that, and we do mention these changes that are happening, and we're certainly very aware of the contribution that activists have made, and particularly, you know, 78ers and other people as well. But yes, it was interesting to kind of look at people who perhaps were a little bit outside of that, and to think about what their lives might have been like.
A couple more questions. Why do you think there's such an interest now in social history? It's a tough question.
Well, I think people always like to read material that is about other people. You know, Robert mentioned that lives are fascinating, and a social history which really does kind of get in there and sort of try and interrogate what life has been like for ordinary people is something that I think can be very compelling, and I hope that our work perhaps will contribute to that sort of area of study.
Would you agree, Robert?
Yeah, no, I would, and I guess it's in a sense, it's kind of like the individualization of a historical story. And you can see this with the popularity of Who Do You Think You Are? The way that, and of course there's celebrities who get investigated in those stories. But it's putting the big, broad dynamics of history, the big, broad brush of history into one life. And I think people do find that fascinating because they can relate very immediately to the struggles of a person.
Will there be a sequel?
We have actually talked about this. I don't know. We'll see how we recover from because it was a really involved and in-depth project that, you know, did take 3 years of extensive travel. You know, and we've both been to a lot of parts of Australia, which has been fun. It would be really interesting, I think, to go back, in 10 years and sort of see where people are. And I know that some of the people who were interviewed have actually said that they'll come back in 10 years and see how my life is. And there is a part of me that thinks that would be very interesting. It's probably something we'd probably need to think a little bit about.
So that's like 7 Up.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Great series.
Yeah.
So,
in fact, there was one person who said to me, the reason I decided to sign up for this is because I love 7 Up. That was one of them.
I remember, yes. I think that might have been possibly Nat near the end.
Was it Matt? Or
Mark?
It was Mark down in Tasmania. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see. I don't know. Part of me thinks this is going to, because I've now written 3 books about gays and lesbians, which is quite enough.
You've got a monopoly.
There's the slip. I said quite enough. I was going to say quite a lot. But part of me thinks that maybe I don't know that I've got much more to say, but Shirleene's good 10, 12 years younger than me, so she will have more to say. But I don't know, what would it be in 10 years' time? What would it be? What would we call it? Ordinary and boring? I don't know.
Normal.
I think that my feeling from the interviews is that people will have more of a choice about what kind of life that they want to live, whether that be an ordinary life, living in the suburbs, possibly married with children, or if they would like to be really involved in political movements, other types of reform movements, and living a life that's transgressive. But I would like to think that the choice will be there in a way that it has not been historically.
That's true. But on the other hand, I think as historians, we'd like to think, you can't be too... You just never know what's going to happen.
That's very true.
So there might, who knows, in 10, 15 years' time, there might be a strong swing back against being ordinary and a reclaiming of transgression. I don't know.
A backlash.
A backlash, yeah.
Shirlene, Robert, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, William.